The scene we just talked about, the sower, Jesus pointed him to it. Now, let's take a moment to go back through and look at the story that he told. Because Jesus gives a familiar story. Look back at verse 4 that we just read. This is the soil under the path. And Jesus points to the farmland around the Sea of Galilee, which looked in this season of the year like a golf course. I mean, it's just luxuriously green. And it was almost like a checkerboard golf course, because it was all the little pathways that connected each person's little garden plot that they had. And Jesus points to those little plots of land that were being farmed, because fields weren't fenced or walled. They just had these pathways. And he pointed out and he says, do you see that man sowing seeds? Some of it's going on the hard pack, the road. And they said, yeah, we see that. And so that's the first aspect of the story. He said the rich soil under the path had become trampled regularly by many feet. It was hard packed like pavement, so the seeds wouldn't find any room. They wouldn't find a place. They wouldn't find any entrance into that soil. And so they would be crushed or devoured. And Jesus talks about the birds coming and picking them off. And if they hadn't gotten picked off by the birds, the oxen, the carts, the wheels, the hooves, the sandals would have done them in anyway. So that's the first, soil under the path. Verse 5, if you look down, is the soil over the rocks. This describes the shallow soil, also common. Remember, the farmers always cleared their land, but sometimes under the soil were these huge outcroppings or huge pieces of rock that were, it was just almost impossible to move them. And so what they did is they just smoothed the dirt around, and after they cleared all the stones, they left those big ones because it was more effort than it was worth. And so those sections, if you remember, with the thin veneer of soil, would be holding, the rock would hold the sun's warmth, plus it would hold the rain and moisture longer. It wouldn't go down. And so it became like a greenhouse briefly. And so he talks about the soil over the rocks and the rapid growth, but then the equally rapid death of the plants who, once that moisture that was trapped in a few inches was gone, were baked. They died. They were gone. So he tells that part of the story. Then he talks about the soil around the thorns. In verse 7, actually there were thorn roots. No farmer would leave thorns out visible. They burned, then they plowed. They burn everything above the soil, then they plow the soil. But the problem is below the soil were the very labyrinthical root systems of these native acantha thorns. And so Jesus tells that. And he says that these thorns, already having their root system, would come up faster than the seedlings, which had to wait to germinate. And therefore, the head start of the thorns would cause the thorns to grow up, sucking up the moisture, grow up, taking all of the sunlight. And so the seedling really never had a chance. And also the thorn bush and briars would have such big fibrous bodies, they'd crowd out. And so they would basically, as Jesus said, choke out the fragile little life. Then Jesus talks about in verse 8, the hero of the story, the good soil. And he points to the last condition of that other soil, and he says it's good. Good. Why? Because it received the seed. Good because the seed sprung out. And good because the seed came to full maturity and bore a crop. And that's what the farmer wants. Remember, it's the same soil in all four pictures. It's rich, it's agricultural, it's the same farmer, the same seed, the same sun, the same rainfall. Everything's the same. It's whether or not they bring a crop. That's the whole story. And Jesus tells it. Jesus pauses after verse 8. In verse 9 he says, now if you have ears to hear, hear. And only a few did. And that group comes to him. And they say, we want to know more.